Hi, and welcome to Let's Talk Horror and Weird West today with Casey Grifant. I get that right?
Yes, close enough. Grifant.
Griffin. Casey
It's
Griffin.
all the same.
Welcome, Casey
Thank
Griffin.
you.
Happy to have you here. I just recently met Casey in person at StokerCon in San Diego, which was fantastic. She helped organize the con and did a magnificent job. It just everybody I've talked to who went there absolutely loved it, thought y'all killed it. So
Great. Oh
thank
yeah, I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah, and out of that has come a lot of really fun stuff. And Casey, you've got some brand spanking new books to talk about as well. But let's get into your background. I'm going to read a little bit from your bio on your website. Casey Griffin is a Southern Californian author who writes internationally published horror, fantasy, science fiction, and Weird West stories for podcasts, anthologies, and magazines. She is a member of SFWA and HWA. Her debut supernatural Western novel, Melinda West, Monster Gunslinger from Brigand's Gate Press, described as a blend of Bonnie and Clyde meet The Witcher and Supernatural. Oh my God. Has received positive reviews internationally. Brava. I really want to read this. And you're also the author of Shrouded Horror, Tales of the Uncanny, which is coming out really soon from Dragon's Roost Press, and Melinda West and the Gremlin Queen from Brigand Gate. So you've got a series and you've got this wonderful collection. This is really exciting stuff. Congratulations.
Yeah.
And I'm like salivating for these because this is a blast. And I want to also say to our audience that I have invited Casey to be part of cross-genre anthology that myself and my husband, Gareth L. Powell, would be debuting in February. We're going to do a cover reveal soon. And Casey graciously has sent us a story, and it absolutely thrilled me. It was such a blast. So, Casey, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. So, I am also a cross-genre writer, and I want to know from your perspective, what do you love about writing across multiple genres?
Hmm. Yeah, I think there's a lot of perks to writing across genres. The main one being is it's easy to keep your interest, right? Because you can jump around, kind of follow your intuition and creativity. I find it's very helpful to take breaks from genres and come back with a fresh perspective. So even like the Weird West, I'll be writing in that for a while, kind of come out and write some horror or some dark fantasy, and it just helps me stay focused. And I think it helps with writer's block too, to be
Yes.
able to jump around a bit. And I think it can be interesting for readers as well, especially when you have elements of different genres that sort of fuse together in a story. Weird West is a great example, right? It has the Old West kind of genre mixed in with a speculative aspect, whether it's horror, sci-fi, or fantasy, or a combo.
Yeah. Now, when you were growing up and developing your sense of story and writing, like, did you have anyone in mind who did something similar that you thought, hey, if they can do it, I can do it? Was there anybody that stood out to you in that regard? Or are you basically forging your own path?
Probably a little bit of both. I really gravitated towards um darker literary fiction growing up. So like Toni Morrison, Margaret Atwood, these writers that maybe touched on sci-fi a little bit or the supernatural, but just had this, beautiful language that is something I still hope to emulate, and very distinct styles, right? You read Margaret Atwood or Toni Morrison, and there's no mistaking them for anyone else. Growing up, I also discovered like the sci-fi genre when I was probably in middle school, and especially the cyberpunk kind of subgenre. And somebody introduced me to William Gibson, and that kind of rocked my world, right? It wasn't this old school sci-fi, the sci-fi classics, which are great, right? It was this kind of grungy sci-fi, very kind of harsh and bleak, and I had never seen that before. And William Gibson has an extremely unique style and poetic way of writing. So those were kind of the authors I looked to for like, they are the masters of their element, and I hope to achieve like just a fraction of their brilliance someday.
Absolutely. And it sounds to me like you are well on your way, and based on what I've read, definitely there. And that
Oh,
that was one thing that stood out reading your story for our anthology, that you have a certain voice and it's unique. And that's part of the fun of having an anthology with these different cross genre writers, different either the story and the author are cross genre, or you're representing one of the genres that we're publishing. And yours is just, like every one of them is unique, but there's something special about yours that really struck a chord with me personally. And I think it's the Weird West aspect that, for me, this was something that I didn't realize I was getting into, that now I'm getting into, and I see it more. It seems like it's really having a moment. Do you think that's true? And what about Weird West tales really appeals to you as a writer and as a reader?
yeah, yeah. It's such a fascinating genre that I have only in the last few years really dove into. And before that, I sort of avoided like Old West movies. I don't know. They were very macho, very traditional, very one-sided, right? We know kind of
Right.
all the issues with how the Old West was portrayed. So I was not interested in that genre at all. And then about 9 years ago, I moved from Boston to San Diego. And I would say there were two factors that kind of got me into the Weird West. One was being kind of in the Southwest, right?
Yep.
This new environment, the desert, the succulents, like kind of all of these environmental aspects that I was not really familiar with. That was very inspiring. And then I also became involved in the local gaming community, playing a card game that's based on the Deadlands universe, which
Oh,
is like a
cool.
Weird West world.
Awesome.
Yeah, it was very fun. But what really captured my attention was that many of the card characters were women in these different roles in the Old West that you or I had never really seen before. So, women lawmakers, women gunslingers, women outlaws, that really captured my imagination. And I actually wrote a few official stories for the card game. And
Awesome.
yeah, and it was like a nice flavor of it. But then I wanted to create my own Weird West world and characters. And these characters came to mind, one of whom is the central character, Melinda West. And she is started out as like imagining a gender swapped kind of stoic cowboy archetype. So she's the central character, and she has a partner, Lance, who's more the charismatic, kind of easygoing boyfriend. And together, I kind of think of it as like X-Files. They're going around solving mysteries in these little towns that have monster problems, like
Yeah.
monster invasions and infestations. So it's kind of like a little bit of Ghostbusters and Bonnie and Clyde and Buffy and Supernatural, kind of that adventure monster fighting horror. And one thing I really wanted to do was to have it be fun. So really just fun adventure, kind of pulpy style. That said, there are like serious themes, right? The stakes are very
Oh, yeah.
high. And Buffy the Vampire Slayer is kind of my model for that mentally, where it's a fun series, but the stakes are high.
You
It
go
gets
dark. Yeah.
very intense, yes, but it's not gruesome, right? Like a
Yeah.
lot of weird westerns blend with kind of extreme horror, and it's
Grindhouse
not
kind
my
of
style
stuff.
at all, but it's a popular genre. It's
Right.
splatter westerns. Um, and that leads to your second question, which is around, is Weird West having a moment? And I think it has been more popular the last like 2 or 3 years, in part because of this other subgenre of splatter westerns, just these kind of brutal, extreme horror stories set in the Old West. But also, there's a lot more diversity in
Yes.
westerns, which had been missing for a long time. So that I think is really interesting. And for me, and I think a lot of authors, the Weird West gives you the flexibility and creativity, or room for creativity, to explore that Old West mythos, right? Without necessarily being so tied to historic detail, right? Like mine is an alternative Old West. So the towns aren't the same, the history is not the same. It's kind of loosely Southwest US, but it allows a lot of freedom.
That's really cool. And also you raised a really good point about writing for a game of any kind. I find it so interesting I think of both you and Stark Holborn, another one of the anthology authors who has written, the Factus sequence of, basically space Western with
Mm,
some horror. And both of you immediately come to mind when I think of this sort of new Old West, in which we're taking some aspects of like game storyline, but also I'm finding too, like there's a little bit of bleed through, right? Because I'm going off on a bit of a tangent about games to talk about, for example, Fallout. In a lot of ways, the character of the ghoul that's an Old West character, and see a little bit of that, kind of lacing
mhm.
through. And that's one reason I also think, we're having a moment after Westworld kind of came and went, there was a little bit of that aspect too.
Yeah,
And I
for sure.
liked that there was this other narrative that even though it was through the lens of, androids, there were different stories to tell that should have been told. And I'd really love to see the diversity of Western stories
Mhm.
proliferating, expanding genre. This is just it's like a golden age, I really think of this. And
Yeah, I think so. I hope so, because there's a lot to explore there. And as
right.
we know, history is not static, right? So there's so many actual untold stories of so many people who were, living and working and thriving or not thriving in the Old West, stories that we had never heard of. For me, I really look towards the women of that
Yeah.
history. They weren't just wives, they weren't just prostitutes, which are the characters you usually see in Old West stories. They did everything, but
Right.
we haven't really seen that portrayed.
Right, exactly. And you think about, seeing things when I grew up, like reading Little House on the
Mm.
Prairie, the Little House books, and like, there's a lot of reading between the lines going on that, really actually the wives, the daughters were doing a lot of hard stuff. They were doing a lot. They were helping the family survive and using quite ingenious ways of doing so. And yet, like, we still don't know all those stories. We still don't
Mhm.
have so many voices. So just your participating in this is helping shine a light, which is wonderful and timely, I think. So I'm tickled. I'm absolutely tickled. And, you know, when we talk about Weird West having some different aspects, and particularly, with the Melinda West series, that little bit of speculative aspect, a little bit of uncanniness, a little bit of X-Files, like you mentioned. Um, will you be dipping more like into horror, not splatter punk per se, but do you see yourself going a bit more horror, or do you think you're gonna kind of just weave back and forth between these genres? We did talk about that appeal.
Yeah, for sure. I think the Melinda West series is Weird West, but it's kind of borderline horror fantasy, right?
Yeah.
It's not like fully horror. Shrouded Horror, my collection, debut collection, that is squarely horror in the vein of, I like to say, like Goosebumps, but an adult version,
Awesome.
or Tales from the Crypt, Twilight Zone, like kind of
Yes.
similar in that it's not extremely graphic horror. It's more under your skin, a
Wow.
little bit of cosmic horror, feminist horror, a lot of monster horror.
Yes.
So that's sort of the vibe I went for that one.
Now, do you have a cover you can show us of this book?
Yep, certainly. This is the advanced reader copy, so there
Look
is a
at
little,
that.
but
My God. See, and this is coming out really soon.
yes, July 11th,
Next
2024 from Dragon
next
Troop
week.
Press.
So,
Next
I
week.
mean, as of recording of this,
Yep.
so that's fantastic. Oh, congratulations. And I'm definitely getting that. And, you know, can you talk about what else is coming down the line? You do have another Melinda West book. Is there anything else you're working on currently
Yes, a lot of
that you
things
can
with
talk about?
happens.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm wrapped up edits on a novella that is a sort of a take on a ghost story. I'm playing with the comps, but I would describe it as Invasion of the Body Snatchers meets Haunting of Hill House.
Ooh,
So I'll be shopping that
I need
around
it.
soon.
God. I feel
It's
like you're writing for me. I'm listening to all this going, there goes my money. It's going to go straight to you. Can't wait.
thank you. Yeah,
Great.
hopefully that one finds a home.
Yeah, I
Uh,
bet you it will pretty quick. And good luck.
yeah, I hope so. I think there's a lot of eagerness for novellas right now. It
We
seems like
are.
a good
Yes.
Yeah, good
And in
area
fact,
to
that's
explore.
something I'm working on right now is a weird horror novella. It's that's set where I'm from in East Tennessee, which I live in LA now. So, I know about the East Coast to the Southwest.
Yeah.
And in fact, had lived in San Diego for a number of years, which we'll get to that in a minute. Um, but like I love that novellas are having a renaissance because they should have always been there. There should have always been the opportunity to have a smaller book that you can tell a really incredibly powerful story that doesn't have to be a door stopper. So
Yeah,
that is one of
yeah,
the things that I
exactly.
will be publishing probably starting next year as part of our imprint will be novellas. So
Great. Yeah, I
I know
love
somebody's going to grab yours, but maybe in the future I'll get one of yours on our imprint.
I hope to write more for sure.
Awesome.
And then my other project I can mention is I'm actually working on a card game that's a kind of a fast-paced party version of Texas Hold'em
Oh my God.
called it's Monster Gunslingers the game. So it's showing characters from the Melinda West universe and yeah, that one's coming out next year. We're totally doing kind of indie funding for that. And
Fantastic.
how it originated, my husband, he used to play Magic the Gathering
Oh
pretty
yeah.
competitively. Yeah, and he's been very, very into kind of board games and all kinds of games forever. So he had designed this game mechanic a few years ago and kind of put it on the shelf. He had play tested it, but never quite did anything with it. And I thought, well, let's put like a Western spin on it and we can use these characters for the cards. And we found this amazing artist
Awesome.
and she's almost done the cards. So I'm so excited to share it with everyone. We'll probably be doing a Kickstarter end of the year for it. And I'll have more information on my website if anyone's interested.
Oh my God. This just like, I'm just freaking out. I'm fangirling. This is because I have done collectible card games for years. I did play some Magic. I played a lot of other sort of like fan stuff, like including the X-Files card game, which I spent an unholy amount of money on in the 90s. We won't tell you how much, but it's just one of those things that's just perfect, right? Like you can take it anywhere, you can play it at a
Mhm.
lot of different ages, and
Yeah.
there's so much rich story. This is great news. So congrats for that. And I can't
Yeah.
wait to share that fundraiser.
Thank you.
And anytime, you want to do that. So I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about writing community and how important it is to be part of a writing community, and particularly in speculative fiction, dark fiction, horror, science fiction. Um, San Diego, I would never have imagined before I
Mhm.
lived there that it was a ripe, playing sandbox for like all kinds of writers, all kinds of stories, a really great diverse mix. I moved there in 2011. I had lived in Seattle for about 10 years. I grew up in Tennessee. But when I moved to San Diego, I kind of I didn't know anybody, and then I started to come back to writing as my kids were getting older. And then looking for a community. And I found it at Mysterious Galaxy Bookstore. Jonathan Mayberry was hosting Writers Coffee House, and I would go like once a month. And I met Dennis K. Crosby, I met Mia Duong, I met so many other writers. At the time, I hadn't met you, but that's been remedied. So, but I really think out of that has come some really interesting networking and support. And I wanted to ask you, like, what's your thinking in terms of the value of having that kind of writing community?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. So when I lived in Boston before I moved to San Diego, I had trouble finding a writing community. So I had connected with like literary writers, people from my undergrad, some sci-fi writers, but like nothing quite clicked. And I always felt like an outsider. I would go to writing conferences, but in a general writing conference, most people are writing memoirs, nonfiction, or literary fiction. The speculative fiction group is very small. So I felt really isolated as a writer for a long time. When I moved to San Diego, I wanted to change that. So I sort of did some research. I came across the Horror Writers Association, HWA, but they didn't have a chapter in San Diego. The closest was in LA.
Yeah,
And I didn't want to drive to LA every
I get it.
month. It's, yeah, not the best drive. So I thought, let me see if we have enough people and interest to start up a chapter in San Diego. And we did. So I co-founded
Great.
the San Diego chapter and we grew. We have a lot of active members. And it was wonderful because I finally felt like I had found my people, as they say,
Yep.
right? Like horror writers are just so kind and welcoming,
Yes.
and they get it, right? Like we write
Yes.
weird stuff and they get it,
Exactly.
embrace it. So that was a revelation for me because
Fantastic.
before that, I didn't really think of myself as a horror writer,
Yeah.
even though I always enjoyed horror. So that kind of self-discovery and connection really was fostered by the community. And then, we grew so much that we hosted StokerCon this last year in San
You did an
Diego.
amazing job.
Thank you. It was a lot of work, but it was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And I think it turned out well. So we're really
Yeah.
happy about that.
So thinking in terms of the horror community, and you brought up the fact that, because something similar has happened to me. I've come around and now I've got 2 horror books out next year. I've been writing short fiction horror for a few years. But
Mhm.
there's something truly unique and special about the horror writing community, and it's really having its own moment, right? It's having its own renaissance across all spectra of genre within it. And I think we're all discovering that more about ourselves and embracing ourselves and our true whoever we are, and I think that the horror writer community is uniquely accepting of that, and as such quite diverse. That's my theory, and that's what it seems like to me. What do you think?
Yeah, I think the especially the indie horror writing community
Yeah.
is so vibrant. There's so many interesting, different, diverse stories and a lot of experimentation with storytelling. And it's just such a great community. When my first book came out last year, Melinda West, the horror writing community and the horror reading community is really what helped me, have it be a success to some degree, right? Like everybody was so supportive, and like online people I didn't know except online, right? Were
Right.
so supportive. I will never forget that. Like it was
Exactly.
such an amazing thing for a debut author to have that support.
And that was my experience too, is that the horror community was there. They were there from go, and they've continued to be there. And I, by and large, like every genre group of authors, there's always some issues, there's publisher issues,
Yeah, for
etc.
sure.
But really, at the end of it, we're all supporting each other. And I always say that my main competitor is myself. Um,
Mm,
but I also realize, like, we're not islands, and to uplift and support other people in our writing communities is just so important. And as you put it so well, that when you came to San Diego, like me, you felt you didn't have your group yet. And
right.
San Diego really helped me find my group, helped you find yours. And now I've since kind of made sort of an LA, but it's a little more spread out. You think of screenwriters in LA rather than
Right.
book
Right.
writers. But there's a healthy, good amount of novelists and comic book writers up here. And we're all trying to find each other. And I think we're getting there. We're getting there. But it's just, I do think San Diego's got something quite special now, and you've helped make that happen. So thank you for that, because it's so important to writers who are coming at it, kind of crash landing your UFO, as I like to say, coming from other fields, or always planning to write in it, that you have that community, that it's there. The resources are incredible. Horror Writers Association, I think, offers one of the best memberships.
Mhm.
And I belong to the group as well as the LA group. And I would have joined the San Diego one, but still could too. I could throw some cash in.
You could, sure, yeah.
Yeah. So like, because I always feel kind of like it's still my writer family
Yeah,
down.
there's actually a lot of crossover with the LA and San Diego chapters. We work pretty closely together for events and
Good.
that sort of thing. You did mention Mysterious Galaxy. I wanted to give them one quick shout
Yes.
out because they are such a hub for speculative fiction and really all kinds of
They are.
fiction. I mean, they are amazing. Like I cannot speak their kudos
See.
enough. They constantly host, writers who have their new books out, traveling writers from around the country and around the world. They host lots of events. Their booksellers are so knowledgeable and so kind.
Fantastic.
And then they also do events like WonderCon and Comic Con,
Yeah.
providing the books. So they are just amazing. And we have a lot of other awesome bookstores in San Diego too.
Right.
Verbatim is one. We have Artifact Books and
Artifact, I was
Encinitas.
just there, in
Yeah,
May. Yeah,
yeah,
great.
I mean, they're all so supportive.
They are. And what's really cool about them too, is that by and large, they also support indie authors. And I'm what you call a hybrid author. I had the Questers on side, I self-published, 4 books. They hosted my events for each of those. When I went, trad small press with Shadow Galaxy, they were there. And at the Amethyst Lantern, they were there. And so I have seen them fill up their calendars every month with just these incredible, both in-person, virtual, or hybrid events for all of the world. And knowing that they give back to the community by helping support local authors just means the world. And I don't know if any, like, there's just something quite special. You're lucky you've got that wonderful community, but you've also got that bookstore and the other bookstores like Artifact and Verbatim, who's also fabulous. And this is just a really wonderful moment. And I feel like I don't want writers to ever feel discouraged that they can't do this, because you're showing that it can be done in real time, that there is a supportive network. And that's what it's all about, right? So because you have people who are New York Times bestsellers like John Mayberry, and then you have indie authors. You have every range of this: comic book writers, game writers, and to just be in it right now is so special. And I'll always sing their praises as well. But now I'm going to get back to singing yours. So you've talked about, you've got these couple of books coming out. You've got this wonderful game, and you've talked about the things that you've done. And I think you at this point can be considered a master of Weird West. So I am so curious, what do you want to aim for next that isn't Weird West?
Ooh, that's a good question. Yeah, so Weird West is one track for sure. I think in terms of other writing, there's always a few stories on the back burner. I've had a sci-fi horror one pending for a while. I've written a few drafts of it, but it's interesting how, each story has its own challenges. And that one, very counter to the Weird West, is heavy and serious, whereas the Weird
Mm,
West is fun,
yeah,
fast-paced.
yeah,
So I'm trying to figure out how to bring some of that to the story if I can, just because there's a weight when I go to write it and edit it. And sometimes the weight needs to be there, but I think I'm still trying to explore how to pull that weight up just a bit so it can still be an enjoyable read and not super depressing. But maybe it needs to be super depressing. I don't know. Sometimes that's what the story calls for.
right.
Um, so sci-fi horror, I love. I have a few other ideas in that area. Short stories, I try to write at least a few a year. So I definitely need to increase my production before the year's over to hit that mark.
Yeah, I'm there with you.
Yeah, it's short stories are wonderful. They're
They
like
are.
palette cleansers, right? You can explore these ideas in small spaces. And I really encourage every writer to, try to master that art form if they can, because
Yes.
there's so many benefits. So those are kind of the rough things kind of out there on the back burner. I have a YA kind of supernatural story I wrote last year and then completely set it aside. And, sometimes you just don't know. You need to write it and
Right.
put it away forever or maybe revisit it. Um, yeah, so lots of kind of random things bubbling up.
Great. Now, I'm going to kind of throw a little bit of a curveball at you. If you were to make a mood board of some of the heavy hitters that you love, let's say in film, like movies that kind of populate your mind when you're writing either Weird West or these other stories, what are some movies that or shows, like they could be shows, that have really influenced you? Because
Yeah.
I sort of think cinematically, and I'm always wondering what other writers think in terms of that.
Yeah, I mentioned earlier some comps, and I think those are the ones that I do hold up as models. So, Buffy I mentioned just because, the characters, you really feel for them, the storyline's interesting. X-Files, which we mentioned, classic for so many reasons, the characters, the story. One kind of, I guess, world or universe that has influenced me from a really young age is the X-Men world. And
Oh, yeah.
yeah, when I was a kid, 10, 11, I don't know, I was flipping through Saturday morning cartoons and I landed on X-Men the animated series. I had no idea what it was, but I saw on screen, again, I didn't know who they were at the time, but I saw
Yep.
Storm, Rogue, and Jubilee in the mall scene fighting. And I had never seen more than one female superhero on screen before. It's like,
Yep.
this is amazing. So it was a revelation for me. And I became a hardcore X-Men fan. I have
Cool.
like hundreds, maybe thousands of X-Men comics in my
Nice.
archive. I watched the show religiously and memorized like all the lines. Super excited when it came back this past year, X-Men
Yep. Yep.
97. But the X-Men, it's such a core concept of hate versus love, right? And feeling different, feeling like an outsider, like these very kind of core themes that are executed so well in this world. And just the way each character has like their personal challenges and weaknesses and strengths. And I mean, X-Men is just amazing. Like if I could invent something like that, whether in the Weird West world or horror world, I feel like my job will be done because
Nice.
as we see it, it's lived on in many ways.
Yeah.
Uh, so that's a huge one. In terms of movies, the Back to the Future series
Oh,
is
yeah.
is my shining star there. It's such a mix of uniqueness, right? Like it's such a weird, strange story that
It
it's
is, but it's
about
so
it.
great.
Well,
It's
let's say like, what
timeless.
is this? It's
Yeah.
brilliant. It's brilliant. And the way it's executed and the trilogy, all the little Easter eggs I've
Amazing.
watched so many times. I always see something new.
Yep.
And plus it has that Weird West element, right? In the
Yeah.
third one. So that to me is just like whenever I need inspiration, I just watch that trilogy
That's
again.
a great idea.
Yeah, I love it. It's so good.
Cool. That's so cool. You're making me want to do an actual anthology that's going to be totally Weird West. So,
Would be fun.
yes, it would, like, and yeah. So, but would you write X-Men if you could write the comic, would you?
I don't see how I could turn away that
I was
opportunity.
gonna say, you sound like an
Yeah,
actor.
yeah. I think yes. I mean, it's always a unique challenge writing in other like licensed worlds, right? To catch
Oh,
up
yeah.
on everything and the history and make sure you're doing it justice. I feel like it would be a big responsibility, but yeah, I would totally be up for that challenge.
I think you'd slay. You would absolutely slay. Well, and then for that matter, Buffy, like if you had the opportunity to write something in the Buffyverse, would you do
Yeah,
that?
that would be
Surely.
fun, especially like a spin-off where there was room
Yeah.
to explore new characters. That would be fun.
Awesome. God, yeah, that would be pretty outstanding. Well, gosh, I feel like you are just on fire. Like, you are the desert wind here, and so I'm super excited for you and everything. And if you wouldn't mind showing that cover again, let's see that upcoming collection of yours.
And this
Grounded
is
Horror:
artwork.
Tales of the Uncanny from Casey Grifant.
And shout out to the cover artist, Luke Spooner at Carrion House. He
Luke
does a
Spooner.
lot for
Beautiful
covers.
cover.
Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you for thanking the artist, because that's what's grabbing, instantly, the
Yeah,
potential readers, that art. So thank you. Well, Casey, I am so excited for you and can't wait to share the world's with our anthology with your story. Is great, and it's going to be a really great introduction to a lot of new readers, I hope. And I'm super stoked for your collection. Can't wait to get it, and hope to see you soon in person. And thank you so much for being on here today.
sure. Thank you so much. This was a lot of fun.
Now, quick before we go, how can our readers find you online?
Yes. So I'm at KC, the letters KC Grifant, GRIFANT.com. Also, pretty much all the social networks at KC Grifant.
Great. Thanks again, Casey. Take care.
Thank you.